Welcome to another OCD Recovery Instagram Live. I'm going to talk a little bit today about different aspects of the OCD recovery journey. So earlier today, I was walking back from the supermarket and I had two bags in my hand and both bags broke. Not at the same time, a minute or so after each other, but I was thinking, it wasn't even that full, that bag. But then it broke and I thought, luckily I'm next to this shop. I can go into the shop, get a new bag and come back out. So I did that next to the supermarket. So after I did that, I got home and I decided I'm going to have some breakfast. And I got the Alpen cereal box and then I opened it. The bag broke and all the Alpen went over the floor. And I thought to myself, all three of these things have just happened. And not a big deal in the scheme of things. But what I'm trying to highlight is things happen. Things happen in life. These kinds of things happen, okay? Now, when we've got OCD, we're zooming in on those things. So if we've got existential OCD, for example, we're zooming in on, if that thing could lead to that thing that could lead to that thing. And then we've got our eye like a hawk on what's happening. We're watching so closely on what could go wrong. Now, with our OCD, that might be a partner's stupid jokes. It might be a partner's shape of his nose. It might be what he likes or she likes as a hobby and you don't like, or some argument thing that you thought that they had a different political opinion to you and it was a bit aggressive, and all these little things. And you're going to find them everywhere. And you always see it because people come in and they say to me, I've just realized this thing, or I've just noticed this thing. And with health OCD, what that will often be is like a long Latin name for some rare medical condition, or some particular ailment that's a thing that they're thinking about. All these things are because of this laser focus, this zoomed in on situations and thinking what's gone wrong and how does that link to something else. Okay, so with OCD, the threat control's up because you're starting to view everything as dangerous, whole of life as dangerous, anything that's happening around is dangerous, and because of that, you're zoomed in that closely, but you won't even notice it at first. Or you will you notice it, but you're not aware that OCD is interjecting, because we can't see OCD. If you have a broken hand, for example, if you've got a broken hand, you can see that you've got a broken hand. And you go, I can see it's a broken hand, so I'll be a bit careful with that hand. With OCD, because you can't see that, you think, that's just the normal way of thinking, or that seems like the correct way to analyze this particular problem. Especially with problem solving, where you're trying to work out how to fix or internally control a situation which didn't need fixing or any additional control. So that is the first thing I want to talk about, that laser-like internal focus. Finding threats in anything. Now, when I had OCD, I've currently got this phone propped up in the bottom of a shelf, which I'm using here to do this Instagram Live. Now, when I had OCD, we've got OCD most likely in the genetic level, but I can't experience chronic guilt, chronic anxiety anymore. But if I take myself back to when I was suffering from OCD, I could find problems with this whole situation just here in all different areas. I could think, what if this phone smashes on the floor and then I lose all the information and that's a problem, even though it's backed up? What if that hob is on and I don't notice and there's a bit of paper that's near the hob and it causes a fire and then I can't get to a fire exit, so I burn to death in a horrible way? That might be one of them. What if the picture behind me, I haven't checked how it's hung on that nail, and it may come down and hit me, or perhaps hit somebody else who's more vulnerable when they're in this kitchen? That wouldn't be so ideal. So those things, it's zooming in like a laser-like focus, because all my life I have not, for example, been paying particular attention to how pictures are hung. But when I was suffering from OCD relating to harm, I was very concerned in relation to things that I had that responsibility element involved. So I wouldn't have even liked to hung a picture myself. It would have probably got someone else to do it, because I would have been scared that I did it wrong, it wasn't properly put in the wall, that kind of stuff, and then it been left hanging and the picture was heavier than what it was being supported on, and over time that had come loose. So then checking those, just to highlight one particular area that OCD would get into, because it's going to get into all areas, okay? Now, the thing with OCD is it has this reputation over the years as being this disorder that, even though that is not what it is at all, we do tend to think of it as some kind of weakness, the same as people with asthma often think they're weaker because they can't breathe as well when running or something like that. They often view that as weakness, and we can view this as weakness. And we know it's not weakness, because I've met people that were in the military and in the SWAT teams in the police with OCD, not caring if they get shot that day, but scared about a particular OCD fear that was latched at the time. So it's nothing to do with strength. I actually spent a great number of years early on in my journey trying to make myself constantly stronger in the gym, because I believed it was a mental weakness. So it became a sort of self-torturous cycle where I was trying to make, although my passion was the gym and exercise and weight training, bodybuilding, all of this stuff, I had this strong desire to make myself stronger so that I couldn't be weak and couldn't be losing to OCD. And every time OCD would get me angry or feel like it had latched and make me feel worse, I would go in the gym and go stronger and stronger. And what actually I was doing was I was tightening that irrational belief there, because the belief was that weakness is awful and I must be stronger. So emphasizing the internal control. And just overall doing the opposite, because you're learning to become this sort of flexible tree in the wind with more less rigid irrational beliefs and more flexible beliefs, as well as with anxiety, learning to bring it for the ride, learning to become an observer of the anxiety and the thoughts and get a distance there so we're not so caught up in it. And if we looked at, for example, a prison system, and we see people in there very angry, strong irrational beliefs, this must not happen, I don't care anymore, everything's been taken from me, I must fight back, or I must this, and then being caged in, and the anger. And anger itself is stemming from those musts. This must not happen, this must. And a lot of people are in prison just because of that. So that's what emotions can do in terms of beliefs in irrational beliefs. And also, one of my fears was that harm-related OCD and stuff in relation to going to prison and so on. Fears like that, which are very common, intertwined with harm-related OCD. The responsibility element, if you zoomed in, it's the responsibility part over-exaggerated in the brain. So I think that, will this be posted on the YouTube channel? Absolutely. We post most of the Instagram lives on the YouTube channel. I can't think of any Instagram lives that we don't. I think most of them, unless I've pushed the wrong button on here or something, deleted it or something like that mid-video. That's the only time it's not gone up. But otherwise, they all do. So I wanted to cover some of those areas, because I think that's very important with OCD, how we view it. I viewed OCD for years as a weakness, and I didn't see myself as having OCD. That's the reality. That's how I felt. I looked online and I looked at people with OCD and I thought, and this is what I used to think. I used to think they've got a problem, not me. And I used to think I'd go in these forums, and in the forums often it was very sort of scary, negative environment with people like, I've been stuck for 20 years, I can't go on all the time. And I used to just think, oh my God, that is not my life and I don't want that life. And then I was sort of not really wanting to accept having OCD as well. That was part of the initial problem. And then on top of that is how we identify with it. You can't, OCD, it's like trying to say, I don't get cancer, that's not me. Well, you can't do that, you're a human. See, genetically you can get cancer, okay? It was like me saying, I don't get mental health problems, that's not me, I'm not that guy. I always saw myself as somebody who was sort of good navigational skills through life, pretty always never sort of complained about much, got on with things, and then OCD obviously attacked all of that. And so I used to think, no, that's not me, that's a sort of a weakness, I don't want to be that, and all of that was going on. And years later, now we see things like heavyweight champion of the world, Tyson Fury, talking about depression. And even a few years ago, and I've been working with OCD for over a decade, even when I saw him come out about OCD, on some level in my head, even though I am very aware and have seen this for years, that anyone can suffer from OCD anxiety, I thought to myself, gosh, how could he suffer? And that's how some of these beliefs, we hold them very subtly. Of course he could. The drive and ambition to do these things, often people are trying to escape things and have very strong irrational beliefs. A lot of success comes from that, and doesn't mean if you don't hold them you don't succeed. That's not it at all, because it's unhealthy negative emotion there, whereas they can be proactive and very driven with a more healthy balance. And Tyson Fury, when I saw that, I thought, my God, if he can be like that, anyone can. And so even on some level we hold these. But I've worked with some people with harm OCD for years. They've got a very good understanding of unconditional self-acceptance. OCD is barely controlling them, causing much problem in their life. And then they still, you can see, bite on certain news headlines. In that bite, in terms of the OCD bites in the head, when there's a certain news headline like someone's killed somebody or whatever, or some particularly horrific criminal case, and then they go right back to the sort of rigid irrational beliefs. And we have to highlight it and break it down again and see it. And then yes, I can see where I was going wrong there. Often hard to see when doing it yourself. When you're trying to recover on your own, it's difficult. I spent a long time, bear in mind we didn't have social media and all this kind of stuff when I was trying to recover, but the most comfortable position, which I've always said, the OCD comfort position, is wanting to be on a laptop, on your back, on the couch. That's sort of where you feel like you're kind of safest, or anxiety is not going to attack the most. And then it tends to attack the most going on holiday, parties, all these kinds of things, because it's trying to attack the goals. It just tends to operate like that. And I used to want to just scroll things. I used to think I should be able to understand this all just through reading. So I used to think I can just read all of this and learn this, and I will just be able to take it in, find all the answers. Plus, at that time, I was looking for this sort of missing key idea, where I thought I'll find some imaginary key that will unlock and release, and OCD will be gone, which is obviously completely the wrong approach, but it feels like that in the brain. Plus, I was spending years analysing past events all day, every minute. So I was in that sort of pattern of thinking that was the way to get out. So I wanted to just scroll and stay comfortable. I didn't really want to speak to any therapists at the time. I didn't believe in therapists at the time. And even when I'd started going to therapists at the beginning, I still didn't want that. I wanted to do it all myself. That was an internal control. But what you realize is that with OCD, it's difficult to often do it on your own. It is difficult to often do it on your own, because it's hard without somebody else often looking at how you're thinking from the other side. Because you're caught up in it, it's not that easy to see. So that's what I realized, that helped, because I had this sort of, whenever I'm working with somebody, I'm not looking at just, okay, look at this fear and sort of break that down. I'm looking at how they are solving problems, or looking at how they are approaching life, how they go about solving problems, feeling safe, that kind of sort of mechanism. So that's what we're looking at helping people with. We're helping them to see how they are approaching life, and how they... Albert Einstein used to say, the thinking that got you into the problem isn't the same thinking that's going to get you out. And that's exactly that point that I'm highlighting here. We're specifically look at problems where we think, okay, if I can just get that there, then I'll be at peace. Because in the past, that's worked, until that doesn't work anymore. So that becomes a problem. So the problem with that is, if the approach of everything is sort of unique to the person you're working with, you're looking at what they're doing, so sort of how they're handling a problem, as well as looking at their fears and so on. What you're doing is, if somebody is coming in who's on that path to chasing an answer, chasing something to get relief, if they're doing that, they'll still be doing that in the normal therapy setting, because they're waiting to hear an answer, waiting to hear an answer, waiting to hear an answer to get peace. So unless the person working with that person understands how they're approaching it, that often gets missed, and that is the contributor to the cycle, as what the catalyst to the cycle. So it's like, for me now, if I knew that next week I was going to get anxiety 30% locked on for the next 5-10 years, I wouldn't panic. In the past, I would have, because I would have viewed that as my life sort of ruined. Plus, I wanted to ensure that it was gone. Hence why you also see people, especially in the OCD community, in comments, saying things like, OCD, often people argue with me and say things like, Rob, I don't believe that OCD can't be cured. Like, it can be, and it can be gone. It's just thinking. The problem with that, it's a bit like an alcoholic, and I've spoken to many alcoholics over the years that are sober, who said that they went through a period where, because for so long they hadn't had a drink, they were convinced that they could drink once again. And always what happened is they went back to have one or two drinks, and they quickly noticed it slipped out of hand. And they then had to distance again. Because the pathways in the brain that are addiction, the addictive pathway, is like a pathway that you tread over and over. It becomes more and more apparent in the brain. And then when you don't tread over it, the grass grows over that path, and then you can't notice it. But the path is still there under the grass. Now, with OCD, it's very similar. Me now, because there's no suffering, I could easily get sort of lulled into a false sense of security that there's no OCD. But I am very aware that if I, for example, started checking this kitchen hob 2 to 3 times each day, that would quickly become 6, 9, 12 and plus, because it would go back into that cycle. I know people don't like to think that because they think I want it all gone, but there's no difference between my day-to-day life between if I had OCD or not, and the level of sort of the rational way I view things and the different perception I have on life, which is very much more empowered than before. It's a whole different world in terms of perception. That is better for me that I went through this experience with OCD than if I hadn't, because I wouldn't have that insight into life. I was operating on a much more surface level, a more shallow version of this. Okay, so this was a hugely empowering and changing period in my life, which has brought about everything I do today and how I see the world and all of that. So being aware of that, and it's no problem. I accept that I have OCD. Lots of people don't want to accept it, and that becomes a problem. It's the same as an alcoholic who doesn't want to accept that they are an alcoholic, okay? Because that sets people up for disaster. Hence why when they go into AA, they say, I'm an alcoholic, because it's one of the first steps. And that's the same with OCD. A lot of the approach that you see with things like AA are similar approaches in terms of recovery from anxiety, OCD, and so on. Not talking about like AA, not talking about the pros and cons of AA. I'm just talking about the sort of general community-like experience that highlights the importance of knowing you have something, being aware of that each day, that one day at a time approach, living your life, and that then becomes a healthy life structure where somebody who's been not drinking for 20 years on a day-to-day basis, it's not consuming their mind at all. However, they are still aware of that, and I think that's key. Another thing that I did a post today about was talking about how the longing for a cure can become a problem. Well, the reason for that is this. It's you're longing for a cure because you're feeling so bad now. And we associate cure with relief, whereas it's not that, right? It's not that we need a cure to feel relief, because otherwise this account wouldn't exist, because recovery wouldn't be something worth achieving. So you don't need the cure, you just need the recovery. If a cure came along today and someone said, can I book you in for the cure on Wednesday? It wouldn't make a difference to me whether you never booked me in at all, because there's no difference to my life. So, but the problem is, when you view that cure as the only answer, you're then chasing that. You're Googling articles about future OCD cures constantly. Now, in my job, I'm obviously working on looking at what things can be done to improve OCD in general. And I've funded psychedelic research to do towards OCD and anxiety and these kind of areas, because I think that obviously it would be better in the future if there was a cure. But we don't need that to live well now. It would be a bonus. Of course, it would make things easier. If someone could just come in, bang, here's a thing, and done, that would be the best option. But that option doesn't exist yet. Do I think it's here in the next 20 to 30 years? I'm pretty confident. But you don't need to long for that, because everything you need to recover is here right now. It's just a case of really looking at that. And it's understandable that people have lost hope in that, because the OCD community, well, not OCD community, but just the help that's been out there for so long has provided some of the journey, but by no means all, which is what I've been sort of talking about for the last 10 years, how it's so important to get a deeper understanding of acceptance and all the other areas of sort of OCD skills and knowledge that are important. And the reason for that being, as I've often speak about, is because what was misunderstood for so long was that harm OCD will just go with leaving thoughts there, but it often doesn't, because the reason being that the reaction is often so strong that the person's so fused to the fear that they can't get that release to become an observer of the thoughts without seeing that the thing they're scared of isn't as scary, which then reduces that fused-like state, so they're able to then become the observer once again, or not once again, just initially, because they've never been an observer. So that's key. Not myself, but all day, every day, people come in that are like, I've done mindfulness for 2 years, I've done yoga, meditation, tons of therapists, why am I not better? And it's like, well, I can see the reason straight away. It's because you're very, very scared of a particular thing. And this is not rocket science. This is just a fact. This is just the realization that if you are utterly, utterly terrified of something and can't create the distance, like, look, I wouldn't look forward to being in a terrible car crash and burning to death. Absolutely not. But I can also see that that's a possibility in life and can happen. So because of that, and I'm aware of that, I'm comfortable with the uncertainty of knowing it could happen, like anything could happen. But I can also see that if it did happen, that it would be an incredibly painful incident, but the world wouldn't explode and end, as anxiety would often exaggerate it right up to be this terrifying, horrifying thing that's sort of out of the world, sort of far outside of the sort of scientific sort of parameters. And that's what it does with catastrophized thinking, because with catastrophized thinking, we're saying something's 110% bad. So it's outside the range of 100. So if you were scared of a spider, you'd be like, if a spider crawling all over me would be the most unbelievably terrifying, unbearable incident of all time. And that catastrophized thinking is what's creating that overwhelming anxiety or guilt-like sensation, or shame. Those three elements. I mean, I put a sort of poll out the other day on Twitter talking about how what do people suffer from the most? And people suffer most from, we were saying, well, what do you suffer most from? Guilt, anxiety, or shame feelings? And people were saying guilt is the most, and that's what's missed so much. People often say you can just leave guilt there, but I know that doesn't work, because I left guilt there for years, and it never left. Like every experience, going to the cinema, going to the theatre, guilt was sort of seeping through as this sort of internal background level of just sitting there. So every experience was with guilt. If I walked in a nightclub, I would think if everyone knew what I'd done, this would be terrible. And then so guilt there increased, and it just pervades every goal and setting that you're involved in. So that's key, why acceptance is so important. And getting under that at the core, looking at why that's latched, learning to see how we can actually stop that cycle. And we've done a lot of videos on our channel about that. We've got the webinar tonight, which is the OCD Recovery Journey Part 2 webinar. We started the first one last week, but if you want to attend tonight and you didn't attend the first one, just email phil@ocdrecovery.com. Philip Morgan organises all of our webinars, so he will send you any information that you need. So yeah, that's phil@ocdrecovery.com if you would like to come to one of those webinars or any of the other webinars that we've got coming up. Now, back to the point about guilt and OCD. The problem that we have is we add an extra cycle. So when guilt and anxiety has been persisting for a long time, we then take the view that the experience that we're experiencing in the now is going to happen forever, because any experience you're experiencing in the now is going to be stronger than your perceived feeling of the future. So if I'm in the cold, it's very hard to experience what lying on a hot beach is like, and vice versa. So because of that, you become completely consumed in this sort of doom-like state, and that's why I do a lot of sort of posts around hope, where we think that because we feel so bad right now, and everything feels so difficult and so challenging right now, then it's gonna be like that forever. And that's not the case. And also, it's a kind of an illusion there, because what happens is you could be feeling terrible now and then in 20 minutes feeling 80% less. And that's very much the case with people who feel like they can't go on. You can chat to them and one call and then suddenly, I'm not too bad. That's how strong that reaction is. The brain does that. So we need to be aware of that and take it sort of one day at a time, because that's so key. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, we get completely locked in and internally focused on what's going on, and then treat it like that's our sort of internal state forever. So I think that's really important. And Nick, who's here in the chat now, as well as does the YouTube videos on our channel, is often talking about that hope and gratitude, why those are such key parts of the recovery journey. Let's take gratitude, for example. When we're stuck, we are focusing on this. But my mate's all right. But mum's all right. Oh my God, all those people at that festival are all right. Oh my God, all those people at that sports thing are all right. It's only me with this. If only I could just be like them. If only I could just have their brain. That's what it does. But that's not reality. What about all the generations in the past that didn't have any help at all and didn't even tell anyone they had OCD? If you go far back enough, if you told someone you had OCD, you might have been killed. They might have thought you're possessed by a devil because they didn't understand what was going on. So you're living at a great time to have OCD. Okay, maybe, of course, not as good as the next 20, 30, 40 years, depending on what the world situation's like in general, but more likely there that they've cured it, or some incredible treatment that's very, very fast. You've got to think of this amazing time now. You have the tools in front of you to recover. They are there. They are there. If it didn't work, I wouldn't be able to ever have anyone improve. We wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't have many followers, and there would be very bad recovery journey stories. It's not rocket science. It works. It makes logical sense. When you see something's not scary, and when you also see that it's your internal control and how you're trying to fix and solve problems and those areas, it reduces. But it's very hard to see that when you're latched, because there's so many things going on. When you're latched, what tends to happen is you tend to tell yourself that I am the exception. Oh, I am never going to recover. They have OCD, they can recover, but if only that thing hadn't happened in the past. It's always going to have an exception. When I used to try and get better, I used to think, what's even the point? Because I've done that thing in the past, no one else has, no one else knows that, so how can that change? So it's particularly looking to latch to those things. It's always going to create that sensation. And it's not anything in the past that's causing the chronic guilt and anxiety. Even if you were serving a life sentence in jail, there's nothing causing chronic guilt and anxiety apart from your perspectives about the event. And that was one of the key pillars of what we learned from Stoicism, from Greek and Roman philosophy, Epictetus, Seneca the Younger, Marcus Aurelius, where it talks so much about that and became the framework for what Ellis then built later, many years later, into REBT and sort of all the rational thinking stuff we're learning today. Because that's it. It's our perspective about things, not the event. Of course, the event initially can be uncomfortable, but then as soon as we see our beliefs, how they're making it catastrophized, we can change that. And the same as Viktor Frankl says in his book, which is on our reading list, Man's Search for Meaning, an incredible book, talks about how one man has always got the freedom to choose his perspective, see things, how he views something. And that's true, because it's only thing disturbing us is that. And that was key. That was one of the most vital parts in my recovery journey, that realization of that. Because until that point, I thought, well, this has happened, so therefore I'm finished and I'm never going to be happy again. And that's what my mental health, just as it is. Chronic anxiety and chronic guilt is needed for what I've done. Whereas in reality, chronic guilt and chronic anxiety is never needed, whatever the circumstances. But we've learnt, society's been conditioned in that way to teach us to think that from a young age. And when we become more rational, the people around us, they're not becoming so rational, but we don't need them to be like that. And then we start thinking, am I thinking right? Is this too much? Is this? And when you need to look at it, you need to look at the evidence and what you're doing. And it's your perception. Take a Buddhist monk, for example. He would look at my life and life in a city as he'd say, God, they're too caught up in all these different things. Although I'm pretty sort of a good sense of sort of internal peace and pretty rational, he would probably think, oh, you're getting involved in this. Oh, you're wearing a particular clothing item, or you're trying to do such and such. Well, you don't need to do this and you don't need that, because of how he would perceive things. But at the same time, remembering that acceptance doesn't mean giving up goals or anything like that, or inner pieces like that. He can choose to live like that because he feels happy in that way, and that goal of sort of a further level of inner peace is what he's doing. But you can feel very at peace and still operate all in society, of course. Otherwise, you'd never hear of a CEO of a company doing a lot of meditation or doing a lot of rational thinking or so on. It propels you, it moves you towards your goals, and you can be calm. Of course, you could choose to live a much calmer life, and there is nothing wrong with that either. But what I wanted to highlight is that becoming rational doesn't detract away from drive and persistence and being proactive in your goals and life. I mean, I work pretty hard and I'm pretty proactive, but at the same time I realize I don't need to do this. It's a bonus to do this. It's helpful to do this, helps people, and it helps me, and it's something I enjoy, and that's why humans do things. We do things to help others, to help ourselves, and that's key. And I think that a really important thing is, Albert Ellis used to say the main goal of life is just to have a ball. And that's true, but you can't just have a ball endlessly. You can't just be sort of partying all the time, that sort of hedonistic way. You can do, but what you will find is that after a while it fizzles out, and we're much better finding things that have a meaning to us, that help our lives and help others' lives, and or in anything that you're interested in. And that's important. And it's very important in happiness to also think about yourself, not to do just things for others and never think about yourself. That isn't proactive. So you need to think about what's going to be helpful for your life and helping a lot of other people's lives as well. Often what happens in OCD recovery, people think they need to make sudden drastic changes. Otherwise, like help the whole world and forget themselves altogether, and then they can go overboard on that, or feeling that they have to now do something because of their new perception. Well, you don't. You can carry on as you are, and most humans do that and adjust their lives around that. But it can often, OCD is always looking to make us make some huge call to action. I need to change this. I need to change my relationship. I need to change my job instantly, and all these variations of this stuff. So what we need to do instead is think, well, what will be proactive towards the goals that is most suited for me and for others, and will deliver the best chance at a sort of healthy, happy life, right? Happiness obviously comes from within, but we can influence factors to help aid the whole journey. So I think that's key, and I think I've drawn upon most of the points I wanted to do today. I will be covering questions and answers in one of the next Instagram lives, because I know it's been a couple of videos since I haven't sort of dedicated an Instagram live video to all just questions and answers, and I know you guys have got a lot of them, so I will definitely do that. So I think that covers most of that stuff, yeah. So a great place to start when you're listening to all this stuff, and if you're new and you're just listening to all the things that I'm covering here, is to start with the reading list. Go on our website, ocdrecovery.com, look at the reading list. those books there are a great place to start. The webinars that we've got on at the moment, the OCD recovery webinars that are broad, is another great place to start because it covers all the tools and all the things I'm mentioning on this Instagram live in getting started for OCD recovery. We offer those as well as the regular group calls each week and one-to-one sessions with me. If you want information about any of that stuff, email phil@ocdrecovery.com. Guys, I will be back on here in the next couple of days doing this question and answers video, and I'll probably be back on here with Nick doing an Instagram live with us together. Hopefully getting some of the other moderators on here at some point to do some talks and discussions about OCD. So yeah, that's the plan. Guys, great to see you all here. And I think, I'll probably be on here on about Wednesday or Thursday. So yeah, I will see you guys all then. Take it easy, guys. See you later.